The lighting in the back is fine, no?
Yeah.
Today is not bad. Overcast helps. Oh. Hey, good morning, whatever, Rabotai. Begins recording here. Okay. We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch or Ahayim, Yechot Kriyat Shema, and we are in Siman Samech Gimal. Seif Gimel. So we mentioned the mitzvah of saying Shema properly, sitting down versus lying down, lying on your back, and on your face. We said it's a problem, and so on. Now Shulchan Aruch writes, even though that in Seif Aleph we mentioned that you could be saying Shema walking around, it's not a problem walking and saying Shema. Says Shulchan Aruch, that's only from first pasuk, well, pasuk Rishon and on. The rest of the Shema you could say walking, but for the first pasuk you have to stand. You can't be walking and saying Shema as you're walking. That you cannot do. You have to stand still, say Shema, say pasuk Rishon, and then go on. Now says Mishna Berurah. He basically says the same thing we mentioned, that even though that we said minatin mutar, that halachically speaking you could say Shema when you're walking around, you should stand in pasuk Rishon at the very least, and later on he actually says it's asur in Mishna Berurah. Here, over here, Mishna Berurah says mitzvah min hamuvchar it is. Later on, if you take a look at Siman Ayin Bet, this is Siman Samach Gimel. Take a look at later on in Siman Ayin Bet, you'll see there in Biur Halacha, the Chafetz Chaim himself writes it's asur to be walking when you say the first pasuk, right? So it's a little bit of a stira. Kaf HaChaim over here already says this in the name of the Midrash. That's asur to walk when you say Shema, the first pasuk. So therefore, one should not really be saying the first pasuk while you're walking. You should be, standing up at the very least. So we mentioned before, the whole Shema, you want to say it with utmost respect. If you're sitting, that would be the best, and so on. The huikar kriyat Shema. The main part of Shema is the first pasuk. The she'enu meyushav kol kach. When you walk around, you don't have clear mind, because subconsciously, at least, you're walking, you have to be careful where you're going and so on. It takes from your kavanah, from your focus, and therefore you should not be doing that. If you already said Shema and you were walking, you have to say it again. Says Mishna Berurah, you don't have to go back and read Shema again. The Pri Megadim says, and that would be the halacha. It means you have to pause in one place, and you could say it either standing or you could sit down. That's even better. Even for Kriyat Shema of Arvit, you could sit down when you were standing already. You could say, I'm going to sit down. That's not like laying down. That we said it's already asur to lie down if you want to say Shema of Arvit, but sitting down is fine. Right? If you change from Amidah Yeshiva, then it's asur for Kriyat Shema of Arvit, because it seems like you're doing like Bet Shammai, If you're walking and then you sit down, that is fine. The switch from walking to sitting is not the same as when you're standing in the shul saying Arvit, and then you say, oh, for Shema, I'm going to sit down. Because there you're showing that you're doing like Bet Shammai, then that would be a problem, as we mentioned before. But if you're walking around and say, well, I don't want to say Shema walking because that's asur to say Shema walking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down and say Shema. Anyways, I have to do something different. So you could all the way change from walking to sitting, even for Arvit, and there's no problem. Says the Mishna Berurah, how about driving? Now, v'yoshev bekaron, if you're sitting in a carriage, or b'sfira, or you're in a ship, then you don't have to stop the boat, the ship, or stop the carriage. Because you're not doing anything, you're sitting in the back seat, and your kavanah is not really disturbed by saying Shema. Therefore, you could say, now, if you're the one that's driving, and you want to say a bracha, tfilat haderech, you want to say with bracha, you want to say Shema. First of all, it's not very recommended to drive 80 miles an hour and say Shema. He said that maybe the last Shema. That's of course it's not something you want to do. But Tesla will actually help a little bit. That's one of the things of having a smart car. But the maaseh for even brachot is machloket, whether or not you want to say tfilat haderech, and you're the one that's driving, or you want to say bracha. You're driving. There are those who say, pull over if you can, stop the car, say your bracha with kavanah, because driving is not the same thing as sitting in the karon. You need, if you pay attention, driving is one of the most exhausting activities. You drive for 4 hours, and you feel like you're completely drained because there are millions of decisions and things that are registered in your brain while driving. You don't think about them, but your brain is doing all the things. Your brain is automatically measuring the distances and the approaching distances and other objects coming close and curves, and it's a constant work for the brain to have. And therefore, even though that we don't necessarily think that our focus is off, but that much of it that can't really be focused on a proper Kabbalah or Rachot Shamayim. So of course, when possible, would be best to pull over and say it properly, especially for Shema, that you need the first pasuk, you need proper kavanah. Says the Mishna Berurah, if you're sitting in the karon or sfina, you don't have to stop it because it doesn't take away. And the Pri Megadim also says the same thing. But if you're a rochev ala be'ema, if you're riding on an animal, you're riding a horse, riding a donkey, riding a mule, and you're the one that's driving basically this animal, then yesh de'ot ben achronim. Then it's machloket achronim ve'nachon lehachmir. And says the Mishna Berurah, nachon lehachmir, stop the animal, stop your ride, say Shema properly, and then go on. Kaf Chaim Paskins the same thing, and it is enough basically to stop it. You don't have to get off the donkey or the horse. Stop it, say your Shema, and then go on. How about if somebody else is riding with you and they're the ones who are controlling the animal? Then Kaf Chaim says still is best to stop it, because again, riding on an animal is different than riding in a carriage. There, you're safe. You're sitting in a room on a bench, and you have nothing to do with the thing. But here, when you're, let's say, in the backseat of a motorcycle, that's not where you have to be holding on. You have to be controlling your balance and so on and so forth. Still, the mind is not free. So therefore, the Kaf Chaim says even if somebody else is riding in front, holding the animal, or riding it on top, and you're in the back seat, so to speak, then still you should stop and say Shema properly. Says the Mishna Berurah, The Pasuk Rishon also includes Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. That's also included in the first Pasuk of Shema. V'yesh Machmirin, and says the Mishna Berurah, this is something we mentioned when we did the Gemara in Brachot, that the Shita is a Shita in the Gemara that says until Al Levavcha, you should treat it like the first Pasuk. That means the first two Psukim afterwards as well. It says, "V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha u'kol nafshecha u'kol mo'odecha, v'hayu ha'devarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha." Until there are those who say, for Machmir, yesh machmirim ad al levavecha. Right? Mishna Berurah brings the Shita of the Bach over here that he's stringent, and of course you could guess what the Kaf HaChaim would have to say on this. Chaim Sofer, he says if it's possible for you, you should certainly be mahmir until here. So therefore, halakha lemase, bottom line. Nowadays, even if you're walking, most of the time you're not in a rush, nothing is burning. You can stop, say Shema properly, say Baruch Shem, and say the next two psukim also standing up, close your eyes, say it properly, and then you could say the rest of the Shema on the go if you are in a rush. So says the Mishna Berurah, from there on you could say it's standing up, walking around, and that is fine. Says Maran in Seif Dalit, Ikara Kavanah b'pasuk Rishon. The main part that you need Kavanah, and again, we have to emphasize that as Shulchan Aruch said it, there are two different kavanot to be had when you say Shema. One is the concept of mitzvot tzrichot kavanah, which is a Shas-wide, a Shulchan Aruch-wide concept, that when you do at least the mitzvot that are biblical, even by rabbinic mitzvot, when you do a mitzvah, you need kavanah. You need to be mindful that this activity I'm engaging in is an establishment, is a fulfillment of a mitzvah darabanan or mitzvah deoraita. So therefore, when you're standing to say Shema, you say, well, I'm gonna be saying Shema right now, which is a commandment from the Torah, b'shochvecha uvkumecha. Nothing to do with understanding the meaning. But the activity I'm going to be engaging in is a mitzvah deoraita. That's one kavanah, mitzvot tzrichot kavanah. And then the simple pshat of what we call kavanah. When you say Shema, you have to have kavanah. That means understand what you're saying, which is Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel. And then there's the two concepts, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Like the Ben Ish Chai explains that one of them is the Hashem Elokeinu, accepting Hashem's kingdom on yourself, and us being subordinate to him. He's our master, we are his servants. That's one, and Hashem Echad, the Achdut of Hashem. Those two concepts are things we accept, right? So that's the ikar of kavanah of the entire mitzvah of Shema, is that first pasuk that we mentioned, says the Shulchan Aruch, Hilkach, therefore, im kara v'lo kiven libo. If you read the first pasuk and you did not have kavanah in the first pasuk, lo yatsa yedei chobato. You have not fulfilled your mitzvah of Shema. Ve'hozer ve'kore, and you go back and you read it again. Ve'afilu leman de'amar mitzvot en tzrichot kavanah bodehacha. Even the man de'amar, even the shita that holds mitzvot do not need kavanah, and when you do a mitzvah, it's already considered a mitzvah even without you thinking, well, I'm doing a mitzvah. Over here, they agree. Now, says the Mishna Berurah, b'pasuk rishon, Ayin Sif Katan Yud Aleph Duadin Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto. So we said already, Pasuk Rishon means Shema, and also Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed. You need to have kavanah in that as well, right? The eternity of Hashem's name, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed. That's a concept that you have to also be mindful of saying as well. And a person that does not have kavanah in the rest of the psukim of Shema, right? You don't have to go back necessarily and read them, you see, from Mishna Berurah over here. Because even if you want to go back and say it, you could do it, but the Or Tzion says He writes that if you want to go back and say it b'kavanah, don't go back and say it b'kavanah, the rest of the psukim. Why? Because once you are yotzeh, if you go back and say it, just because you want to have more kavanah, it's a hefsek now between the time that you said Shema and you were yotzeh and the rest of Shema. So therefore, says Chacham and Sion, try to get it right the first time, right? Important. But if you didn't, so long as you had proper kavanah in the first pasuk and Baruch Shem, you don't go back, says Chacham and Sion, because we don't want to have hefsek. And also, he says, there's a hakpada that it should be 248 words, right? You want to say the 240 ramach evarim, right? And so if you go back, then you've said a whole list of much more than ramach. And it says, therefore, once you're yotze, you don't have to go back and add to the words of Shema. No, because you're starting over again. And you were not Yotze, so what do you want to do? You were not Yotze. You messed up. That's a, here also, you didn't do what you're supposed to do, but you didn't mess up. It's not something that is ma'akiv. So that's the difference, really. So it says, the Mishna Berurah that says Baruch Shem also is included in this, which seems to indicate that even until al levavcha, even though that we just mentioned that Kafachayim says until the second pasuk after Shema, right? The third pasuk, I mean the first two pasukim after was until Hayom al levavecha. Also, you should stand and you should have kavanah. But nevertheless, you see from here from Mishna Berurah that if you said those first two pasukim without kavanah, you're still yotzeh. Even though that those two psukim are more important than the rest of Shema, but still, if you said it without kavanah, unfortunately, but still you're going to be yotzeh. Says the Mishna Berurah, lo yatzah, if you said the first pasuk without kavanah, you're not yotzeh. Afilu im kodem sheitchil likrot nitkaven lekayem ba'kriyah mitzvat aseh dekriyat Shema. Even if you had kavanah, even if you had said, I am hereby doing a mitzvah d'oraita of Shema, and then mindlessly you read Shema. Mindlessly. You said Shema, you're not Yotze. Mikol makom, kol shebe'emtza pana libo lidvarim acherim. If in the middle you completely were mindless and you're thinking about something else, hare lo kibel alav malchut shamayim ba'askamat halev. You didn't accept malchut shamayim. The whole point of it is you're accepting malchut shamayim. That's the point of Shema. It's not like putting on tefillin. That's a mitzvah. That's what here the mitzvah of Shema is to accept upon ourselves malchut shamayim. So if you didn't accept malchut shamayim because you were thinking about the cholents from Shabbat morning, so then even though that prior to that you said, I'm doing this mitzvah Shema, so what? That's not accepting or malchut shamayim. Therefore, you're not yotzeh. Vechozer vekore, and you go back and you read it. We mentioned already this before, that when you must go back and say Shema, you say it quietly to yourself because you don't want it to sound like you're saying Shema, Shema. You're saying Shema twice, which is a halachic problem that we discussed before. So therefore you say it. Well, it all depends. If it's going to be seeming like you're saying Shema twice, so then you can just close your eyes instead of covering them. It's all hakol lefi ha'inyan, really. Ve'ayin le'el b'siman samech aleph Mishna Berurah. We discussed this already earlier on in Siman samech aleph. Ve'afilu im kibar kara, even if you already read Shema, kol parashat Shema, you read the entire parashat Shema, and v'haya im shamoa, and then afterwards you remembered that you didn't say the first pasuk with proper kavanah. You have to go back and start over again from Shema. The im lo yikra rak pasuk rishon, if you only read first pasuk Shema, then you're reading backwards, right? And we said you cannot read Shema backwards because even though, in other words, let's dissect this. the parasha of first parasha, Va'ahavta, and the parasha Va'aya, if you said without kavanah, you're yotze. Shema is the problem. Now, you would argue, well, so I said Va'ahavta, I said Va'aya in Shema. I just were not yotze. I was not yotze Shema. So let me go back and say Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad Baruch Shem, and go back to Vayomer. Can I do that? No, because then you're doing it lemafreya. The eno yotze kedil kavam b'siman samech dalet. As we're going to discuss in next siman, you're not yotze if you say Shema backwards. If you say the Shema after the first parasha. Okay, you can't do that. So therefore, once you realize that you said Shema without kavanah, even if you're by Vayomer, you go back to Shema, and once you start Shema, you go Kesidran, V'ahavta, and Ve'aya, and then Vayomer. ואם נזכר באמצע פרשה והיה עם שמוע, יגמור עד ויאמר ויתחיל ויקרא שמע. Says the Mishna Berurah, if you, in the middle of Parashat Va'aya, you remember, oh, I didn't have kavanah, so Mishnah finish the Parashat Va'aya, then go back to Shema and go on again. Now, yeah, basically, right? Well, Kaf Chaim seems to disagree with this. Kaf Chaim says, even though the Mikar Adin, you see like this, that you finish the paragraph and then you come back, he said, Al Pi Asod, the parashiot is very important, so therefore you go back and you read it Kesidran. Again, this is one of those things that the Mekubalim are very specific about. You remember before the discussion came up also, the machloket between Chacham Obadia and Kaf Chaim. What do you do if you come to Arvit late, right? You get to Arvit a few minutes late, and they're almost by Kaddish of saying Shemona Esrei, right? So, as we're going to see, we alluded to this before. Tfilah b'tzibur, according to many poskim, is only considered Tfilah b'tzibur if you start Shemona Esrei with the tzibur. Mamash with the tzibur. So then Chacham says, yeah, but the eved, if you daven most of your majority of the tefillah with the tzibur, so on and so forth, fine. But there are many who hold tefillah with tzibur means you have to start with the tzibur. So you come to Arvit late, a few minutes late, and they're about to start Shemona Esrei. What do you do? So says Chacham, but yeah, you start with them Shemona Esrei, and then afterwards, after they finish, you go back and you say from the brachot of Kriyat Shema and Shema up until the last bracha of Kriyat Shema after Shema, and you complete your tefillah that way. You could do that. Kaf Chaim is not happy with that, because Kaf Chaim says everything that Anshe Knesset Gdolah instituted in the order of tefillot is not just a arbitrary order that, okay, say this. No, it's literally like a ladder that you're climbing. Every step of it matters. Every Kaddish matters. Every order that you have matters. And therefore, it should not change. He's willing to go as far as saying, daven b'yechidut. Meaning, we're not talking about the case that you have a Leider Minyan. If you have a Leider Minyan, for sure. But even if you don't have a Leider Minyan, he wants to take the liberty of saying, better daven b'yechidut, and not change the order of tefillah. It's a very interesting tshuva actually from Rabbi Yaakov Hillel. We will end with this. He was asked, what do you do if you are a Sephardi Bachor in an Ashkenazi yeshiva, and the Ashkenazim say Sfirat HaOmer before Alel Shabeach? Right? They say Sfirat HaOmer before, we say Sfirat HaOmer after Alel Shabeach. So should I, as a Sephardi Bachor in an Ashkenazi yeshiva, should I say it with them because I'm worried maybe I'm going to forget after Alel Shabeach if I don't say it? Or should I somehow make a reminder for myself and first say Alel Shabeach and then say the Sfirah like it's Sfaradim? And he goes to prove that you should wait until after Alel Shabeach because every single thing of the Tefillah has order, Al Pi Kabbalah. And therefore, don't mess with the order of the Tefillah. Say Alel Shabeach, then say Sfirat HaOmer afterwards, and then he goes on to give some musar about not changing the things when you're in the yeshiva with the Ashkenazim and so on. So much a beautiful piece in, I think it's the Siman Hey of the Shuot by Yashav Hayam. Bezat Hashem will continue this in the days to come.